So Genesis 11, 1 to 18, the story of the Tower of Babel. So 3 questions. Let's start off with our first one. How do you understand the narrative? What was their sin? What was the sin, the thing that the people did wrong at that moment in time? And Tammy might run upstairs and get me my Torah. Thank you. We had to shift rooms because I was upside down, literally. But that's another story. Let's think about the Tower of Babel. What was the sin? What did the people do wrong?
Overreaching themselves.
So, Ross, they were overreaching themselves. How so?
By thinking that they could get close to God.
Okay, so something about getting close to God. Okay, so how would you describe, in what kind of sense would you describe that overreaching themselves?
Thinking they had the ability to build, to climb, to enter a space that really was not theirs.
Okay, so it's fascinating what you've just said, because there's one thing which is spatial, and there's something else which I would describe as probably theological.
They want to make a name for ourselves, but like, what does that mean? Well, I guess, does that mean that they want to be like God? It doesn't really say what that means. It's how we interpret it. But I guess that seems to be the thing that would be objectionable. Well, how that's a sin, I don't know, but that seems to be the thing that they're doing wrong.
It's brilliant, isn't it? The idea, I'm coming to you, Celia, in 2 secs. The idea that you want to, actually succeed in life. You want to make something of what you're doing within your life. What on earth is wrong with that? That actually seems quite a sensible thing that one might achieve. I've got Celia and then I've got Sharon. So Celia?
What Ros said is what we often hear, but whilst I was reading, Anja was reading it there, it struck me that there's a parallel with what is going on in architecture and has been for some time. Absolutely. With various cities trying to build higher and higher, with this thing of making a name for yourself that you can do better than everybody else.
Okay, I love that idea because, Sharon, I'm coming to you, don't worry. There is definitely something about the way that we want to build up. Yeah. Okay, fascinating. I'm wondering soon whether people are going to want to build down because up is actually not going to be so safe.
There's this amazing book called Underworld. Have you heard of this? Where it's basically this guy's talking about all the building under, whether it's mines or tunnels under Paris or...
Anyone who will know Rabbi Jonathan Black, who trained at Learbeck College, served the Elstree liberal community and built his house down and then moved literally down under. He's serving a community in Australia now. He literally did that. But yes, very much the fascination of how we build, how we and what we're building towards. A fascinating term is the notion of one of the words for a burnt offering, which literally is olah. It's about going up. It's the same root as aliyah, which we talk about going up, making emigrating to Israel. The idea of going further up is there's a value judgment, of course, attached to it as well. But that notion up, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. So I got Celia and then Celia. So that was Celia. Then Sharon, and I've got Nova, and then I've got John, and then I've got whoever else was waving at me. Okay, Sharon.
Thank you. So just to pick up that point about building down, it's actually happening. If you think about it in central London, all the fuss is about all really wealthy people building basements and swimming pools and stuff. So actually those with money are doing that, but that wasn't the point I wanted to make. I was thinking that what God got cross about was nothing they may propose to do will be out of their reach. And that seems to me that God is saying that only God should be able to do absolutely anything. Only, mere people shouldn't. That was how I read that bit.
Thank you so much indeed. So there's something about the limitation of humanity, okay, within that. A fantastic point. Thank you very much. Vis-a-vis God, but however, our ancient ancestors understood that. Yes, Sharon?
Yeah.
Thank you so much indeed. Nova, and then John, and then Angela.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Sorry. John, you can go first. Sorry.
No, go. I interrupted accidentally. Go ahead.
John interrupted you, Nova. Don't be.
Yeah, so I think the one very obvious word that hasn't been said yet is hubris. That is the word that I've always been taught this story is about, right? This idea of that humanity can claim or can try to think about themselves as being able to get to the same level as God or something. And maybe here the idea is like, I don't know if it is the right interpretation of this, but you could say perhaps by thinking that this one structure basically that they were constructing would unify all of humanity rather than, faith in Hashem. This is perhaps where the hubris lies, that it's like in the efforts of humans rather than in faith that the unifying principle of humanity would be found, and that is a mistake they made or something.
No, fantastic. Thank you so much indeed. And I think I might get three texts tonight, and I'm hoping I might. So if I do that, that'll be a massive thing. So I just want to take that, and I'm going to mix and match some of the questions I asked before about benefits and downsides of uniformity. And of course, we have something today very much going on. We have staying in our home at the moment, a gentleman from Ukraine. And if we think about how sort of modern day pharaohs have tried to take power, autocratic power, and to describe themselves or their peoples as having the right, the hubris, to be able to move without impunity into different places, to kill with impunity, etc., etc. There are so many examples in our world of where that sense really is problematic right now, not just within within the Russia-Ukraine situation, but in many others we could look across the world as well. John, go on. Thank you.
My point was really similar to Sharon's, but on a bigger scale, because if you just look at London, but many cities, we do live a lot underground. If you just look at the New Elizabeth line, when you go down to it, not only do you go down from the Bakerloo line or the Piccadilly line, which itself is underground, you're going deeper and deeper into the bowels of the earth. And I sometimes wonder how London actually stays up, because there is so much dug in underneath it. What is actually holding the surface of London up, because we've made so many holes in it. But I just wanted to say that we are living underground.
That's beautifully poetic, and also just simple things. I remember being in Antwerp, and one of the most beautiful things within there, one of the tourist attractions, was that you could go down through, what's the style of architecture of those bridges either side? I can't remember. Art Deco maybe, or Art Nouveau. And then you go under the river. The idea that we have the power to go underneath and through, past a moving bank of water, natural water, quite phenomenal. Yes, you're quite right, John. So much of our life is underground. And at the same time, I think all that we live underneath many flight paths. We also, like to go up and over, and also we, whether it be the notion of conquering Everest or anything else like that as well. Thank you so much indeed, Angela.
Well, I have a brief point which touches on Sharon's and John's as well as Nova's, that it was building a centralized, conspicuous building, which they may have felt would be some sort of marker to their presence and their achievements. And also, as a passing comment, in the Orkney Islands, centuries ago, they were building underground, their houses up there, the remains of houses built underground.
Thank you. As ever,
But that's escaping the weather, no doubt.
no, as ever
But
about
trying to find God in the centre.
yeah, your incredible breadth of knowledge. Absolutely fantastic. Last comment from Betty, and then we're going to move on. Oh, you're going to just
Okay.
Right. It's actually me. The
who's me? Because I'm
sorry, I'm Peter. Betty's.
I should have changed my name.
Betty's.
Betty, don't change the name, because you can be Betty and Peter can be Peter. It's nice.
It's very kind of you.
That's right.
If you have complete uniformity, it's very difficult to have change, as authoritarian regimes have discovered from time immemorial. It's by having diversity that you develop change and progress.
Thank you so much indeed. A brilliant place to stop on this text, and I thought of the unity. I know that you will want to study in the future with Rabbi Naomi and myself and Rabbi Leah and Rabbi Monique about, and all your local rabbis, about this amazing story. There are some amazing literary tools used within the story which point to a number of different aspects that the biblical author wanted to make. Okay, so do come and study with us another time when we look in depth at the Hebrew as well, because there are absolutely stunning pieces of novel information within that. But what we've described is a number of different ways that we create unity. Sometimes it's geographic. We're literally, if you think about it, the Tower of Babel was all in one place. It doesn't talk about being spread out around the world. Everything was in one place. There's definitely something which was also cultural. They were all behaving, all the people were behaving as one. There was no dissent. There's absolutely something about language. Unfortunately, I don't know that I'm looking now at somebody who's Dutch. I'm looking at someone who, I know, and people of who I know have the ability of other languages. Unfortunately, I grew up at a time when languages and teaching languages in this country was absolutely shocking and appalling. Or maybe it's my own fault. I don't know. I'm just blaming the system. But we're not very good at it. No, that's right. We are very bad at it in this country. We tend to speak with one language and expect everybody to speak English to us. When one moves abroad and suddenly you're in a place where you're unable, we are lost. These people absolutely were speaking with one language, and there was definitely something about that. And then God messing it all up. And the words, there's so many, if you go and look at your Hebrew lexicons and see just how many words you can get out of Bavel, the root, it's brilliant. Words like muddling up come from just this root letter. Brilliant words. So in modern Hebrew. So go look at that as well, which is a fantastic notion as well. I love the word Nova. Thank you so much about the notion of hubris. I think, an absolute nugget within this story is the notion about humanity, and peoples can create a narrative which places them amongst others, above others. If you only have one, then you need to, in a sense, try to compete with another world, because there is no other. And perhaps that's the bit about trying to reach God, or to reach at least the other world, because there was no other competition. And frankly, that's boring. So let's look at another piece of text which actually looks at how we might actually develop the world in a slightly different way. This one also, it's also.
I just wanted to say, I'm going to turn my camera off to eat, but I'm going to monitor the waiting room, and I'm still here.
Oh yeah, and I will, and Tammy will as well. So don't worry. Just if you've got a mouth, don't spill your food for trying to let somebody in. It's not worth it. Yes, Angela. Sorry, very quickly.
Your last comment bothered me a bit, because when you only have one, you tend to get authoritarianism, one truth, which you then justify imposing on everybody else. When you get diversity, providing you have space for diversity, and there's a big question there, you get a much better situation, provided, I suppose, that the diverse masses, whatever and whoever they are, have some sort of central organizing, overarching body. I mean, in this case, it would be God as a sovereign law.
But yes, no, I understand. I think my point was that, you know, this is just an example. The tribe, you know, the one tribe system, I think most of us would agree is problematic. And the notion that you know, in that instance, even then, they're looking for diversity. They're looking to compete in a sense with the other realm. They can't deal with the fact they're actually one. They're lonely.
But they're building a centralized position.
Well, you can look at it like that, but they're trying to reach something.
Right, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, so they're actually trying to reach something which creates some different kind of existence as well. So, you know, it's absolutely fantastic. Just looking at the comments as well. Jean, just say what you were going to say.
Oh, it's Jan. Hi, hello. Yes, I was thinking actually of all the other civilizations that have carried on building either pyramids or ziggurats or whatever. And when we were talking about building underground, actually we are building on top of old civilization already. That's why archaeology is digging out all the time new remains of past past lives.
Yeah,
but I'm always amazed that even like when you think of the Buddhists, the modern monasteries are always at the top of a mountain, always at the very top of something, in order to be closer maybe to a higher realm.
Absolutely. So, Jan, thank you so much indeed. The fascinating thing I've learned in time as well is that there's also those people who understand their life through height and those who understand their life through water. And for many people, underwater is another place. I've met so many people, you know, who actually who divide between the two. Very quickly, Alex, thank you so much for that fantastic comment as well. The notion that you can speak one language but not understand each other as well. Very, very, very true. And of course, we know that with any language, there's always one way to, especially with biblical Hebrew, because it's a dead language. So to fit that into a modern world where we have so many different words, that's difficult. So one word can mean so many different things. Paul, very quickly, then we're moving on.
Okay. I don't know when this was written, but I wonder whether it's being used to actually explain how people migrated all over the world and developed different languages, and then uses it to actually give the lessons that we've been discussing up until now. So
I'll stop you at 100% right. Well done. So let's move on to our next test. So 100% right. That's exactly what it's used for. You know, it's one of the. It's right at the beginning of the book of Genesis. These are fables, myths. They're only there. They didn't happen. They're there to explain something. It's about the creation story. You know, it's only asking the question: how do we get here? So all of these things, you know, exactly answering those most basics of questions. So let's just look at a few verses. I'm only going to look at a few here because it's quite repetitive, but from Genesis 49. So we were at the beginning of Genesis, and we're answering those fundamental questions about literally where did we come from and the origins of the world. Now we're moving on to something that has gone through the development of our family. Where did we come from? Which basically what the rest of the book of Genesis is interested in. You know, what's our particular identity? And here we get a fascinating conclusion to this book about where did we come from. And let's start off with Genesis 49. So who can I see who's there? Sandra, do you want to read for us? Because you're unmuted.
Okay. And Jacob called his sons and said, "Come together that I might tell you what is to befall you in days to come. Assemble and hearken, brought disgrace. My couch he mounted."
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Simeon and Levi are a pair. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness.
Fantastic. Let's read a few more lines.
Let not my person be included in their council. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, they slay men, and when pleased, they maim oxen. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel.
Okay, one more.
You, O Judah, your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the nape of your foes. Your father's sons shall bow low to you.
One more verse.
Judah is a lion's whelp. On prey, my son, have you grown? He crouches, lies down like a lion, like the king of beasts. Who dare rouse him?
Thank you so much indeed. And if you notice, there's more verses about Judah coming on as well. Whereas for all of the other tribes, there's only a couple of verses, or sometimes just one line. So we get the blessings, all of the blessings from Jacob to his sons. And who do his sons become?
Tribes of Israel.
Say that again.
Tribes of Israel.
Tribes of Israel. They are the dads of the tribes of Israel. We don't know about the mums, but we know about the dads of the tribes of Israel. Okay, they're named after them, and always we know which one is going to be the dominant one because they get the most verses. They get the most exposure to them. Okay, so we know that Judah is going to be the one which is going to be the most important one. Most verses about Judah. But so for each one, we have a description, a particular blessing, or a description of the nature of each one. What can you say characterize about all of the blessings? Again, this is Genesis 49, if you wanted to look at it within your own pages, Genesis 49. So what would you say about all of the blessings for each of the sons? How would you characterize them in their entirety?
Deep. A deep understanding of his children.
Okay, I love the idea. Okay, he had a deep understanding. Okay, they're into the psyche and the emotions and the characterization of his own children. Fantastic, Nikki.
Well, that's sort of less of a blessing and more of a kind of prediction. It's you know, this is your life mapped out. You're going to do well. You're not so well. You know.
Well, that's perfect, and that's asking the same question that Paul mentioned just before. It was, you know, when was this written? Or what was the question that they were trying to answer? And for Paul's, it was, you know, literally at the start of the world. How did people get spread out across the world? Different languages, different characterization, etc. Well, here's a story to tell you how that happened, and it's the Tower of Babel story. Now we're getting on to Jacob and the different tribes. And, you know, Nikki, you've got 3 sons. How would you, I'm not asking you to answer.
I wouldn't talk to them like that. You know, I think Sam would be pretty happy. He was doing really, you know, number one son was doing really well until Judah came along, you know.
Indeed, absolutely. And so that's the thing. Sometimes we talk about our children in competition with each other, and sometimes we actually look at them just about on their own merit. And we look at the individual and we try to understand them in a better way. So what a wonderful text that we have here. What do you think that this says about the Jewish people, where we have this wonderful text, chapter 49, where Jacob is blessing the 12 tribes of Israel? 10 of them get lost, by the way, at some point in time. Now we're beginning to find them back, aren't we? And discover different tribes that they understand themselves to have been lost, or they give the narrative of that. The Abu Yudaya community of Uganda, wow, only founded in 100 years ago, as far as we know, but the narrative that they give is being part of a lost tribe, reclaiming that heritage that they have. So how do you understand this in terms of the notion of tribes of the Jewish community, of the Jewish people, the nature and that we provide for them?
Is it separate units within the whole?
So absolutely. The nice thing about it is that they're all B'nai Israel. They're all part of the children of Israel, or the Israelites, however you want to describe it. Okay.
Those two, that pair of warfaring ones, can't we sort of not have those?
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to maybe not have them, but what would we do if we didn't have them? It's
not Judah. He was winning battles, wasn't he?
Oh, they were all in battle at some point in time, and the fascinating thing is, whilst we might not want, to peoples to be at war, tribes very often are. And what do we do if we don't have the ability to actually survive? This is very interesting. One of the strengths of our people is that we survive, not always by might. Not always by might. However, occasionally at significant moments we did.
Is this not a building up of a nation of Israel with all the qualities that you need for building a nation? And each of the sons contributes something different to actually make up the whole.
It's absolutely fantastic. So when we get differentiation within and acknowledge the different, let's call it gifts and blessings, okay? I mean, some of them may come across in our eyes, contemporary eyes, as not very nice, but everybody has a part to play. We all contribute into that community and that idea of the people of Israel. So, Tano, thank you very much indeed. Really, really important. Any other notions about the differentiation? So here very much we get 12 distinct tribes, 12 distinct peoples. Do you think they were ever in? Yes, go on, please, David.
Well, I don't think that we necessarily start off with a unified Israeli people.
Let's call them let's call them Israelite rather than Israeli. Yeah. Okay, let's
Right, people, because the way the world worked in those times, and we know this from archaeology and history, is that in the places where power structures were developed, clans were important, and clans were family based. And to my mind, the writer of Genesis is looking back and explaining how these clans might have arisen, but also explaining the unifying factor that keeps them in some way together, except when they fall out among themselves.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like Scottish clans, except that there's a notion of Scotland here, which is an Israel, a national or super clan notion. But I'm sure in ancient times, when people moved around, they moved in their family groups, their wider family groups, and those were, we call them tribes, but they were actually small, bound together, family-based communities.
Thank you. I love the idea when, and I've got Betty, Peter, and Paul and Angela to speak coming up. I love the idea when Bilam looks down on the tent encampment of the Israelites, and he's sent to curse them each time, but ends up blessing them. And one of them is, "How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel," which we start all of our services with. And when Rabbi Naomi and I look down on our flock, wow, we've got diversity. We've got a bunch of different people, but we all fit together to create that community. And quite rightly, Rabbi Naomi or myself might then go home and write a poem or a piece about the nature of our community. And we'd be doing that in hindsight. So absolutely, there's that notion of, when is a piece actually written? And I think there's also the validity about what does it say about us? The fact that we are able to say in Kol Chai and the Ark, well, actually, yeah, you know what? Bunch of different people, but we hang together. There's something very special about that. So I've got Betty and Peter, and then Paul and Angela.
The thing that struck me was it was pretty brutal language, which perhaps it's a Jewish trait or tradition to speak your mind clearly, but you can only do that in family. Mm-hmm. If you're meeting somebody outside your family, you're much more diplomatic about what you say.
I really like that, and there's so many different lessons that we can learn about that as well when we talk about each other. Thank you so much indeed. Really appreciate that comment. Paul.
You mentioned briefly the mothers earlier on. The commentary in my Torah actually says that the list of the sons are in order of their tribal mothers.
Thank you so much. So even though it's not made explicit that the mothers, the matriarchs are mentioned, and here we're not just talking about Rachel and Leah, we're talking about Bilhah and Zilpah as well here. Thank you so much indeed for bringing them into this, which is very important. So they're implicit within the text. Thank you. That's brilliant. And of course, if we understand the text have probably been written by men, at least we can doff a little bit of a kippah to the fact that categorization was kept within these best. Thank you, Paul. That's brilliant. Angela.
Yeah, when I knew I wanted to click into this, I looked up the definition of tribal. And so clearly it can be a group of persons who have something in common, and that could be occupation, or it could be, as Paul suggested, descent from a particular source, that they have that in common from generation to generation, particularly matrilinear. So common stock, if you like. The Romans, I found out, defined their people by where they came from, Etruscans and so on, but then made it sort of territorial after that. So it depends what we mean by tribal. I mean, as the original questioner said, how did these tribes come together? What did they comprise? And of course, they did comprise strangers and slaves as well. So even if you had a core that had some sort of connecting theme, they also incorporated others.
You're going to hear it in this week's Torah portion, the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude. Well, perhaps we were all a mixed multitude, and these are narratives which help us to understand ourselves and our identity. But very importantly, when we think about the future of Judaism and the limited numbers that we have, one of the very interesting things is how we welcome people into Judaism. I'm sure that Rabbi Naomi experienced exactly the same effect that we had, of a multitude of people wanting to come into our community through the lockdowns. So all those people have thought about it, and maybe it's been in their background, or they had answered it, whatever the reasons, and suddenly here was the time to actually focus on something. And this was something which really came out. The number of people that wanted to join our people. We sort of talked about it a little bit last week, but how open are we to the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude that want to join our people? Maybe this is another epoch-making moment. Who knows? Thank you very much indeed. The idea of tribes and the differentiation between us is so important. We've looked already today at how the people were as one. Quite rightly, as Paul mentioned out, how this was a narrative to explain how the people became diverse, as into different nations. And now we've got a blessing here, which we just looked at, which is how even within a nation or a people, there is diversity and differentiation. What happens when those people want to go off in slightly different directions? Let's have a look at our final text today. Yes, I've got through all three. Fantastic. I'm so delighted. So we're just, again, going to look at the first part of this. It's far too long for us to get through, just so we get the idea in our heads. If anybody's got any questions and don't know the text so well, just ask it in the chat, and I'm sure others will catch people up pretty quickly. But I think it's a text that I think most of us would have an idea about. So I'm just looking at who is unmuted at this moment. Mina, would you like to read for us?
The Reubenites and the Gadites owned cattle in very great numbers. Noting that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were a region suitable for cattle, the Gadites and the Reubenites came to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the chieftains of the community, and said... Okay, just stop there for a moment. So basically, these are lands which are on the east side of the River Jordan. Okay, the Israelites ready to come into the land, and the Reubenites and the Gadites had said, we've got loads of, our business is cattle. And we've got fantastic grazing lands on the east land. Why on earth would you make us cross over the land? Let us just say, and they're going to give a load of names of the places and the towns and etc. we don't need to go into. Okay. Basically, the lands are fantastic for it. So let's carry on at verse 5, please, Mina. It would be a favour to us, they continued, If this land were given to your servants as a holding, do not move us across the Jordan.
Wonderful. Okay, we need a different voice here because there's different voices here going on. So Ros, be Moses here.
And Moses replied to the Gadites and the Reubenites, are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that the Lord has given them?
I love the idea that there's a plan. Okay, there's a plan, and somebody Volt raises something and says, is that really such a good idea? And then everybody says, groupthink, let's go down this direction. And actually what the leader said in the plan was all wrong in the first place. What a nightmare for rabbis and for lay leaders of communities. Okay, you're going to turn the minds of everybody, just as happened in the past. Okay, we're not going to go down all of that. So let's come back to that was all about the spies and talks about them. But here we get the response. Mina, can you take us up in verse 16? Okay, Moses has admonished them. Really, like he's really put them down, but they come back and say,
then they stepped up to him and said, we will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children, and we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land.
No, we will not carry on.
We will not return to our homes until every one of the Israelites is in possession of his portion.
And just finish us off.
But we will not have a share with them in the territory beyond the Jordan, for we have received our share on the east side of the Jordan.
Sounds like a pretty good deal. Okay. We're going to go out as right at the front of everybody. We're going to be your cannon fodder. And, conquer the land for all of our sisters and brothers. And only then we'll go back to our land. Sounds pretty good. Moses comes back and says, Ros.
Moses said to them, if you do this, if you go to battle as shock troops at the instance of the Lord.
Very, very good voice. Thank you very much. And very commanding. Carry on in that voice.
And every shock fighter amongst you crosses the Jordan at the instance of the Lord, until he has dispossessed his enemies before him.
Brilliant, fantastic.
And the land has been subdued at the instance of the Lord. And then
okay, excellent. So basically, you've done all of that, okay, and but if you do not.
But if you do not do so, you will have sinned against the Lord, and know that your sin will overtake you. Build towns for your children and sheepfolds for your flocks, but do what you have promised.
Okay, so there's wonderful nuances on this. The arguments go back and forth, etc. And again, study with Rabbi Naomi and myself and Rabbi Leah and Rabbi Monique and your local rabbi, because there's some fantastic, amazing piece of text. I didn't even pick up about orders. Orders in text, lists are really important here. And there's a real nuance in the Moses' response as compared to the Reubenites and Gadites that Nova clearly gets, because Nova is nodding her head. So go back and look at this. But the point is here, we have two tribes wanting to go in a different direction to the big project. The big project. 12 tribes go over into the land, let's conquer it all together. And two tribes say, not too sure about that.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to go down a slightly different direction. So we've got 8 minutes to talk about what happens in our communities when people decide to go down a different path. And this has happened throughout Jewish history. So what does this say about the Jewish people, peoplehood, and our understanding of it today?
Arguments and competition.
Thank you very much. Arguments and competition. We love competition. Can be a positive as well as a negative thing.
Yeah, well, yeah.
No. It can work both ways. So I've got Angela and then I've got John.
Well, it can lead to warring and factionalism because each party maintains they have the truth of the matter, and that gives them an opportunity to think of the other tribe as the other and deal with them accordingly.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. I think that's so important. Where we begin to think of people as the other, rather than identified within ourselves. Okay, I really love that idea. I've got John, I've got Paul, and I've got Rabbi Naomi.
I think it leads to something rather contradictory, and it arises in a sense out of what Angela has said, because there are different approaches to Judaism, different people observe it in different ways, and yet, speaking only, of course, for myself, I feel related to all of them. And that's very strange, because if we look at Hasid or Haredi lifestyles, it's completely different from my lifestyle, and I couldn't possibly lead that lifestyle because that's not how I'm made. And yet I feel a commonality with those people that perhaps I don't feel necessarily to lots of other people whom I don't know and whose lifestyles I do not imitate. So there is a contradiction.
Absolutely lovely. Thank you so much, John. And Paul?
The last part of the story is that the two tribes, although they want to belong to the greater community, they've decided where they wanted to stay. But instead of being selfish, they want to do something for the whole community, and they go forward as the shock troops, secure the land for the other 10 tribes, and then settle back where they wanted to be.
Thank you so much indeed. So they had very much a part in the destiny of the entirety, and at the same time were able to maintain their own particular identity and interest. Thank you so much indeed. Rabbi Naomi.
It's always the third text that's the most interesting, I think. I think this is such an important lesson about diversity for us and diversity within the community. There are so many voices saying this is how it is to be Jewish. This is a Jewish way. This is what Jewish peoplehood means. And it can be quite hard to be a dissenter around that in particular areas. And yet it's really, really important. Not all Jews think alike about anything, but we are all part of the same people. And I think this is a really, and I know the story very well, but I never really thought about it in these particular terms, that it is a model of how to be different, how to express different routes, different paths, different politics within the same community, about coexistence and pluralism.
So I want to doff my kippah now to Rabbi Ephraim Mervis. The current chief rabbi is enabling voices to be heard within the community that otherwise had not been, and is allowing people to be at the same table that no chief rabbi had really done before. Within our own country, within the UK, and I know we've got people who are living abroad at the moment, this is a very refreshing voice. Somebody who's able and confident enough in their own identity to allow the table to be built, to be opened up to others. And I think there's something which says something about his own sense of identity and confidence that he is able to do that at this moment in time. Now, I might have differences with him, etc., but still I can very much understand him coming from his point of view and respecting that and providing that point of view at this moment. For those people interested, John, you raised something which really resonated with me. Thank you so much indeed. It's something that I've often raised in conversation, that I may be of the same religion as the Chassid, and I may have more in common with my neighbor who is not Jewish than the Chassid. Let me take that away and say, I have lots in common with a Chassid, and I have lots in common with my neighbor who is not Jewish. And we create a different narrative, something which understands and respects where we began tonight with, which was our common humanity. We acknowledge all of our differences and the positivities and the negatives that may be, and the fundamental comes back to the same point, which is that we're all part of the human family, and something which each one of us really deserving of respect as well. And we all play our part. The Reubenites and the Gadites were very much open to the criticism. They stated their case. This is what we'd like. And were open to the fact that somebody came and batted back. What happens when there is a world where no one actually criticizes us? That's, we need to be open and to be able to hear the criticism and then to be able to respond to it. And quite what a way that they did as well, to be able to say, we will go over and help to conquer. And at the same time, this is what we want. Now, in the terms of Jewish history, we can then say they became lost tribes. They did choose. So in terms of the way that religiously, or at least the rabbinic tradition understands things, we can say, okay, they chose to live on the other side. There are so many different ways that we can twist our narratives to make a point.
Yeah.
I think what we've shown, hopefully shown and thought about tonight, is the fact that we actually oscillate between being a unified people to sometimes being more diverse, other times coming back and being more diverse. What's fascinating to me throughout time is that it's often within adversity that we become most unified. When we're most affluent and consider ourselves to have privilege, we diversify. That's just a fascinating point within our Jewish history. But I don't know, because I haven't studied enough, whether that's, and maybe people like Angela and others with great knowledge of other civilizations will say that that's exactly the same of other peoples, and we're just navel gazing and by looking at our own people. But yeah, that's what we're talking about. Last point to Peter stroke Betty. I'm hoping Betty's going to speak now.
It's me.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of Jews being human, and human beings do that. When we have a common enemy, then we unite. And when we don't have a common enemy, we're free to squabble amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. The fascinating thing is that's all okay when you don't live within a wider society and within the publication of that. So what happens, let's just say, in a disputation between different peoples in a town in Eastern Europe back in the day, that becomes exposed to the other peoples living around them. Oh, look at those Jews. They can't da 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 da. Now look at that in a global world where news is so easily disseminated, that becomes a much bigger story. So whereas one time, one situation was very isolated to a certain geography, now things are much more global. And there's more of an issue around that, which I don't think we've addressed as a people. I don't think we've been able to actually come together and think, how do we converse amongst ourselves in a constructive way, in a way that actually helps us, the people, to be able to say, yeah, this is the Jewish people, pros and cons, etc. And we're like all humanity at the same time. That notion of the uniformity, going into diversity, coming back to uniformity, and this cycle that we all go through. Peter, I'm just going to stop you at that moment in time, because I know that you'll say to me this privately as well, but I promised that people would finish at 8:30. We finished at 8:31, which is dreadful. But I do hope that you'll come back and join us next week. We have Rabbi Monique Mayer, who is going to be leading our session from the Bristol community. And she is going to be leading a session on navigating our diverse communities, trying to be able to do and work out the issues that we've just concluded with tonight, which is the beauty of the diversity and sometimes the problems that it brings as well. So thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
To hear Peter's final
word.
Thank
you, Aaron, for teaching tonight. And it sounds like the conversation is just going to continue next week. Yeah. We move seamlessly on to navigating divisive communities. Yeah. The natural next step. Thank you all for coming.